In total, we have millions of unemployed people who are not particularly worried about the lack of work. So, the results are disappointing, and here they are. What the coronavirus couldn't destroy, people decided to finish off themselves. For Trump's political opponents, it's a great chance to get his supporters, because current stock market prices do not match the real picture of unemployment, production drop, and a looming wave of bankruptcies. Glad to welcome you to the CoinPost channel. Mass protests in the US have subsided, at least according to official statements. But I decided to get into this topic because what's happening in America today may not just be a fight against police brutality, and it can lead to deeper processes that subsequently affect the welfare of the United States and will ricochet throughout the global economy. In fact, this video is about money, where we will address current events in light of the social, political, and economical situation in the US. And let's try to look a little ahead to understand how this can affect the future of the stock market, the worsening crisis, and merely the purchasing power. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and stay tuned for the latest events and their consequences. Let's begin! The reason for the mass protests, in which millions of people took part in various American cities and even outside the country, was the police misconduct, which led to the death of a person during detention. Further events developed rapidly because the active social support of the peaceful protest gave a chance to looters, and the riots began. It's true because when the police are busy with peaceful protesters and it's not clear whom they are protecting and who they don't have time to uphold the rule of law on the streets. The human mind is arranged that most people think crime is associated only with punishment, and if there's a situation where you're unlikely to be held accountable for a broken display window or a stolen phone, and everyone else is doing the same thing, then not joining illegal activities becomes extremely difficult. And here we must pay tribute to peaceful protesters in the US. There were more of them, and they opposed looting and even helped prevent riots. The question is, why the protests were so massive? This can be explained by the coronavirus, or rather, the measures to fight it. Freezing the economy and quarantine measures have led to a sharp increase in the number of unemployed. The number of applications for unemployment benefits in the United States reached 40 million from March to May. The statistics vary, but we can say that at least half, that is about 20 million Americans, haven't got their jobs back after Donald Trump announced the start of economic recovery and the end of quarantine. In total, we have millions of unemployed people who are not particularly worried about the lack of work due to the unconditional income in the form of payments from the state. They were also tired of restrictions regarding the past quarantine, and then there is an excuse to take to the streets in large numbers, which subsequently also became an occasion to try to improve their well-being through illegal activities. I draw your attention to the fact that the initial root cause when the person died is awful, and I condemn this event, and I support those who peacefully, I emphasize peacefully, protested against police brutality. But I'm more than sure that if a similar situation occurred in, say, 2015, when the United States didn't have millions of unemployed, and also there would be no long-term restrictions on civil liberties, as it was now because of the coronavirus, then the scale of social protest would have been much smaller. And about their consequences, coming up. As I said at the beginning, protests are now subsiding. I hope this trend continues and we'll have only peaceful actions. We can already summarize what happened, which we will divide into two parts. The first, what has already happened, and second, the consequences this may lead to. So, the results are disappointing, and here they are. What the coronavirus couldn't destroy, people decided to finish off themselves. After all, the fight against the pandemic primarily affected small businesses, due to restrictions on the operation of shops, restaurants, beauty salons, and so on. Now, when it was possible to get back to work, they were simply smashed, burned, looted, and so on. Interestingly, during his appeal to investors, Warren Buffett, when reporting a loss of $49 billion, also predicted enormous problems for the insurance business. I guess he expected a wave of bankruptcies amid a pandemic, but as it turned out now, there are other reasons for that. After all riot victims are now going to apply for the payments from insurance companies. But don't forget that the coronavirus is still here. And because of the mass protests in the US, The threat of the second wave of the epidemic has increased dramatically, even though they haven't really recovered from the first one yet. The authorities, not only in America but also in other countries of the world, have already realized how destructive for the economy is the closure of businesses and the disruption of international trade as part of the fight against coronavirus. Therefore, even if the number of cases now goes up in any country, they will tell us that the worst is behind us, they expected it, and they don't need a new quarantine. That's how it's going to be until hospitals run out of beds again. It's the worst and most undesirable option. But if it comes to it, then long live the new quarantine with all the consequences. And another crucial long-term outcome is a blow against the political image of Donald Trump. He always tries to prove himself a powerful president. And you can't say that the decision to introduce a national guard to take control of the situation was a bad one. But from the point of view of the protesters and those who sympathize with them, and as a rule there are many times more of those, sending the troops in is seen as pressure from the authorities and as an attempt to respond to a peaceful protest forcefully. Americans don't like that. For Trump's political opponents, it's a great chance to get his supporters before the presidential elections this fall. And this can be a significant point in light of future events, which we'll discuss later. Before the final part of the video, I want to ask you to support the channel by subscribing and giving this video the thumbs up. And don't forget to turn on the notifications. This will help promote the video so that as many people as possible can see it and get ready for the future consequences. Your support is my best motivation for creating new content. Let's take a look at the S&P 500, which is considered an indicator of the US stock market. The market downturn started in February and reached its bottom in March this year, stopping at minus 35%. They say the leading cause of the incident is the coronavirus pandemic, or rather, emergency measures taken to fight it. But then Donald Trump and the US Federal Reserve entered the game. I specifically focus on Trump because, according to Fitch ratings, the state allocated almost $5 trillion to overcome the pandemic effects. Most of all, it was the United States that spent 20% of its GDP. In many ways, such a strong Fed reaction was caused by pressure from Trump, and America saving the economy became an example for other countries, thanks to which the stock market had a real rally since mid-March, and at the moment the current drop since the beginning of the 2020 crisis is only 8%. It's the same V-shaped recovery that most investors in the stock market now believe in. That is, the quarantine has ended, and soon everything will be back to normal, including the new S&P 500 index growth. However, hedge funds don't share such a positive attitude of the majority. They stress that V-shaped recovery is nothing more but a fantasy, because current stock market prices do not match the real picture of unemployment, production drop, and a looming wave of bankruptcies. And hedge fund managers are confident that the US Federal Reserve is undoubtedly a dominant player, but even its resources are not unlimited. By the way, the Fed has recently stated they fear the second wave of the crisis, and there's evidence for it. We talked about this in our recent video, but for some reason, few people want to hear this information. Returning to the US protests, I want to point out that they have long-lasting consequences and can be a decisive factor in the struggle between optimistic investors and hedge funds that are already going to short the stocks. As previously discussed, such massive events could lead to a new wave of infection, and if hospitals fail, then quarantine measures will have to be returned. And last time, when the American economy was closed behind a fence and barbed wire, absolutely all markets fell. Even Bitcoin dropped by 50%, because without exception, everyone panicked and went into cash. If a similar situation with quarantine in the US occurs, then a new sale in all the markets is inevitable. But this is not the only possible reason. In light of the riot wave which took place, the load on insurance companies will go up. They in turn will ask banks for a loan, and banks will take money from the Fed. The latter's resource, as already mentioned, is enormous, but still not unlimited, and therefore those who are now buying shares of insurance companies and banks can lose a lot. The same Warren Buffett sold 84% of his shares in Goldman Sachs 2 weeks ago. In recent months, all he has been doing is cashing out without buying anything at all. But optimistic investors don't see what Buffett is doing. They were shy and preferred to buy blue chip stocks immediately after the market collapse. Now they entered the stage of buying everything in the hope of further growth. Another important fact is that proponents of the second bottom in the stock market believe that prices are kept artificially until the fall, when Trump becomes president again, because not a single American president has been re-elected for a second term during the financial crisis. But after everything that happened, Trump's approval rating is down. He might make a mistake. I don't expect Trump to abandon the idea of taking a second term and give the Fed a command to stop the printing press, which is now keeping the entire economy. I think he will fight for the presidency to the end. However, the worsened political situation forces him to look for the new ways to show himself as an influential leader. And as we know, the best option for this is to find an external enemy, that is, to resume trade wars with China, or even better, to arrange similar slowdowns with Europe. And in the oil market, despite the prices back to $40 per barrel, it's not the end, because there's still no recovery in demand. Trump has too many rakes scattered around, which he could step on, and the result could affect the rest of the world. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching. It's the Coin Post channel. Subscribe and get enlightened.